Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Different Strokes Virtual Conference 2022. My name is Austin Willett. I'm CEO of Different Strokes, and I'm really pleased to see you all with us this morning. This is the third of the 10 sessions that we'll be running this week as part of our virtual conference this year. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsors, Bolt Burdon Kemp, for enabling us to put on these sessions all this week. And I'm really pleased that this morning we've been joined by Laura Barlow from Bolt Burdon Kemp, who will be talking with us about issues surrounding post-stroke rehabilitation, as well as taking some questions. I'd just like to start with a few housekeeping notes. First of all, this call is being recorded today, but rest assured that it will only be myself and Laura whose details are being captured. We're the only ones who appear on screen. And there won't be any details shown publicly of anyone who's viewing this at all. A lot of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with Zoom and familiar with the chat function. I can see that from the amount of people who said good morning to us already, so thank you for that. But please do use the chat to talk to us this morning. If there's any comments that you'd like to post, let us know where you're watching from, etc. I'd also like to direct you to a Q&A function. If you do have questions specifically for Laura, please do use the Q&A, and then we'll be monitoring them, and time permitting, we'll look to get to some of those questions at the end. I can't guarantee that we'll be able to answer all of them, but we'll certainly do our best. If I could please ask, though, that if you do have questions, that you specifically use the Q&A and not the chat, because they could easily get missed within the chat. Anyway, once again, thank you for joining us this morning. And now I'm really pleased to hand over to Laura Barlow. Laura, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks, Austin. And thank you for having me again at the conference. I did a session last year, and it's really nice to be able to sponsor the conference again and to be able to speak to you all this morning. So I'm going to speak as far as my experience goes about post-stroke rehabilitation. So I'm just going to share some slides. Hopefully that's okay. Austin, is that okay? Yep, great. So I'm Laura Barlow. I'm a senior associate solicitor, and I work in the adult brain injury team at Bolt Burdon Kemp. So I specialise in cases for people who have suffered brain injuries, whether it's stroke or any other type of cause of brain injury. So it's not moving along. Just gonna have to, oh, there we go. So I thought I'd start by talking about the definition of rehabilitation. So I know many of you watching will have had some rehabilitation already, but a definition that I saw used in some training that I attended recently was this: the use of all means to minimise the impact of disabling conditions and to assist disabled people to achieve their desired level of autonomy and participation in society. So what I kind of take from that is that rehabilitation is not something that is prescribed and just done to somebody. There's no one size fits all. It should be a person-centered approach, and it should be a holistic approach. And I know that resources can make that challenging, but that's in my view, that's what rehabilitation really should be for people who have had any kind of brain injury. And this is another quote that I've seen recently about rehabilitation and about making it personal. So I'll just read that out as well. We're not just legs and arms and a mouth. We are human beings with a mixture of emotions. All these feelings, self-esteem, self-worth, confidence, identity, they're all under attack after a stroke. You can feel vulnerable, frightened, and you can lose yourself. And this is, I came across this in a presentation that I attended, a different presentation recently, which was about identity after brain injury. And again, I think this just highlights that sometimes rehabilitation can just be seen as, okay, you have your physio, your OT, your speech and language, and you have this many sessions, but that actually there's a person at the centre of this, and we've got to remember the individual person and what their values are, what their feelings are about, how they feel after they've gone through a traumatic event such as a stroke, and finding that identity again through rehabilitation. So just talking a little bit about the benefits of rehabilitation, obviously on an individual level and on a family level, there are benefits to the individual, but I just wanted to highlight that I've heard this said a lot of times in various other places, that rehabilitation is cost effective and it pays for itself. So even if we're to ignore the personal benefits and the benefits to families and communities, it actually makes economic sense for people to have quality rehabilitation, because it's worthwhile to have people who have made the best recovery they can possible after a stroke, and it benefits us all. So one of the cornerstones of rehabilitation, which many, those of you who've already had any kind of rehabilitation after stroke, is goal setting. And I think if you've had sessions with OTs, physios, some of you may have case managers, there's always a focus on what are our goals going to be, and it can't just be somebody setting goals for the person who's had a stroke and they're a passive passive person in the process. There has to be an agreement, and it's not on the slide, but comes back to identity and values again. If somebody has had an opportunity to think about, what are my values, what do I actually want to achieve, what do I want out of my life after stroke, that can help to set goals, and goals have been proven to be associated with more behavioural change, and there's some other evidence around it makes it's effective to set both short-term and long-term goals. So you may have a goal for, by next month I will do this, but actually in the long term, in 5 years' time, this is where I want to be. And again, specific interventions can really help to achieve goals. So because this is a presentation for different strokes, I wanted to talk a little bit about specifically rehabilitation for young stroke survivors. And I did a bit of research on this a year or so ago, because it sort of came to my attention that there are guidelines around specific rehabilitation for people who are of working age who've suffered a stroke, but it doesn't seem, as far as I could tell, that those that younger people who suffered a stroke were actually receiving specialist rehabilitation. And so the guideline, which is from the National Clinical Guideline for Stroke, which was published in 2016, recommends that acute stroke services should recognise and manage the particular physical, psychological and social needs of younger people with stroke, and liaise with regional neuro-rehab services specialising in the neuro-rehabilitation of young adults. So I obviously don't know exactly where all the people watching fall in sort of like the age range of stroke, but I imagine that some of you, or many of you, are under age 65, and I wonder whether you have had access to any kind of specialist neuro-rehab for following the stroke. Because the guidelines, I'm going to show a few slides now, you don't have to read through them, but a few just little snippets from the guidelines. But they recognise that there are specific challenges for people who suffer a stroke when they're still of working age that may not be as relevant when somebody's older and they suffer a stroke. So things like work is a big one, childcare is another big one. Because if you're, I guess, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, you may have young children, and that's obviously it's a challenge well, whatever position you're in. And so these are particular challenges for people who have had a stroke at a younger age. And so this is the first kind of snip from those guidelines, which talks about acute stroke services should recognise and manage those particular needs, liaise with regional neuro rehab services, and ensure that care is more specialist, which is what I was talking about at the start, that we are recognising that there's a cohort of people not completely separate to the people who are older, have had a stroke, but there are specific challenges there, and recognising those and trying to meet those needs. And this is another snip that I took from those guidelines, and it's talking about this is looking at work and activities pre-stroke. And again, there's recommendations there that people should be referred to specialist vocational rehabilitation if job centre specialists aren't able to assist with that person's particular needs. So I'm going to put a link right at the end if anybody wants to look at that more. I've put the link so you can go and look at that guideline after the presentation if you desire to do so. So following on from my initial research on this, I decided to send out a couple of freedom of information requests to a few hospitals to find out how many adult stroke patients they had admitted in 2019 who were under the age of 65. So how many people are there actually being admitted? And out of those people who were admitted, how many received specialist rehabilitation, focusing on rehabilitation of young adults? And I got responses from 3 out. I think it was only 5, and I do intend to ask more in the future. But just as an example, the 3 hospitals that I heard from, 2 of them don't even record that information or had zero specialist rehabilitation for young adults, and the one that did identify that they had referred some young adults who had had a stroke to specialist rehab. There were 10 out of 272 admissions, so only 4% had actually received any specialist rehab. So I think, I'm completely, I know that it's tough, and services are struggling to do the best that they possibly can. But I think possibly for some of you, awareness of this might be able to might help you to, when you're speaking to sort of like your medical professionals, to say, well, I know about this guideline, and I think that I should, there's a specific problem that I've got that I really could do with some specialist help. And who knows, it may make a difference. They might just say, well, there's just not fun, we don't have funding for that, or we just don't have that service. But I think possibly having that information might help a few of you. And that's why I put the link as well at the bottom so you can find it afterwards. So just talking again, moving on from the young adult stroke specialist rehab, talking a little bit about where you might find rehabilitation. And I know that people will be at various different stages in their journey. So some of you may have gone through many of these sort of options already, but just to talk through the various avenues. So NHS provision, obviously often when people immediately suffer a stroke and are admitted to hospital, there's acute care. And that usually starts in hospital with visits from physiotherapists, speech and language therapists, and then possibly occupational therapists as you're coming up to discharge. But the offer, it depends, it varies area to area, and that's one of the other things that I'm going to come on to a bit later on. That the stroke acute care has come on a huge amount in the past sort of 10-15 years, and acute stroke centres are very good at that initial early rehabilitation in hospital. But it's still, when you kind of get out of that acute period, that's when services tend to vary quite a bit more. And when you leave hospital, there is some availability for inpatient rehab for people who've had a stroke, but it seems to me from what I've seen that more often than not, people will be discharged to home for community rehab. And again, that's something that varies hugely across the country, and even within counties, the provision can be very, very different as well. So, so that's a very brief overview of what NHS provision might be like. And like I said previously, there's, you know, funding, obviously somebody has to pay for it, so there may be some services that you think could be useful to you that are just not available. Second sort of avenue for rehabilitation is a private package of rehabilitation. So if somebody has medical insurance that will pay for rehabilitation, that can be an avenue. And self-funding, I know it's less likely, but if people do have funds for rehabilitation, it can be, you know, can be quite expensive. But as I said, the benefit of rehab can pay off in the long term. And then also through the work that I do, when somebody's successful in an injury claim, then they have private funding to set up their own rehab package as well. And I guess the benefits of a private package of rehab is shorter waiting times to access rehab. Rehabilitation is less likely to be sort of cut off. You know, you've had your 6 or 12 weeks, and then that's the end of it. You know, even if you don't feel like you've made all the progress that you could. And then also you can have a wider offering of services and specialists. And I just wanted to mention some other avenues for rehab, and some of these have come about as a result of COVID and the pandemic. So online services, there's been a bit of a boom with online services, and I know that different strokes have offered online services throughout the pandemic. So virtual exercise classes, support groups and things like that. Not so much traditional rehab, but still in terms of that emotional support and thinking about, you know, the person as a whole can be really useful, especially if people are feeling isolated and struggling with the sense of identity after having a stroke. So yeah, just talking, this is just a little bit more detail about each of those. Publicly funded NHS rehab, like I said, more likely to be prescribed due to budgetary restraints. For stroke rehabilitation, it's likely to include physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, and neuropsychology, which many of you may be familiar with already. But one of the things that is quite important after a stroke is at least in my opinion, it's a neuropsychology assessment, because it can be very difficult to tell specifically what people are struggling with without that in-depth neuropsychological testing, cognitive testing, to identify what are the specific issues that somebody is struggling with. If you are accessing publicly funded or NHS rehab, there could be referral to other specialist departments. So if your eyesight's been affected, if there are issues with continence, and also psychiatry in terms of the psychiatric effects that can follow on after a stroke, if that's needed. And so with private rehabilitation packages, all of the above, but it can be a lot easier to access other services. Like I said before, a lot of people who set up private rehab packages will have a case manager, who is a person who sort of coordinates everybody, the support workers and all of the other therapists. And then there can be, I think it allows probably a more personalised rehabilitation package. So whatever that individual needs, they are likely to have more access to it. And fairly recently seen quite a bit around technology, you know, using tech for physiotherapy, which looks to be quite an exciting and new thing. And also with that, you could also have, you know, sort of complementary and alternative therapies. So there's more and more research about sort of like the benefits of yoga and things like that, that, you know, you're probably not going to get a prescription or an offering from the NHS, but I'm sure I'll be corrected if I'm wrong on that. And so the other avenues for rehabilitation, like I've talked about, online services like the exercise classes, support groups. There are also things now like online courses that you can do, and online therapy. And then there are a number of different apps that have either been developed or are being developed that can assist people with some of the common issues that you might have after a stroke. You know, if you've got cognitive difficulties with organisation, there are lots of assistive tech apps for, I think, speech, or if you struggle with reading, there's apps that can sort of read text for you. And again, so those other avenues that might be helpful and might assist with rehabilitation, although they're not sort of like a traditional rehabilitation like physio or speech and language, can really help and kind of just build into that overall picture of trying to live as good a life as you can after a stroke. So what to expect in hospital? Many of you will have already been through this. There will be the people sort of coming around and doing the physio. They try to start physiotherapy, I think it's 24 to 48 hours after a stroke. So they're trying to get in really early and start that rehabilitation. And then after the acute period in hospital, some stroke patients will go to inpatient rehabilitation, but it seems as though, to me, based on what I've seen, more of those places tend to go for traumatic brain injury, the inpatient rehab. Inpatient rehab, I think there's a sort of usual time of around 12 weeks. And like I said before, more often than not, people may be discharged from a stroke unit to home. And I mentor a guy who had a brain injury quite some time ago, and he always, I see people with him, and he always says to me that when you get home, that's when the real work starts. In hospital and in a rehab setting, it's an artificial, you're not in real life, and the real work starts when you get home. And I'm sure many of you have been through that already and know that it's, you can do your rehab in hospital, your rehab in the rehab unit, but actually when you get home and you try and get back to some sort of normal life, that's when other challenges that you hadn't possibly noticed previously can come to light, and friends and family members might pick up on things as well. So although it would be good to see sort of like, this is a period of rehabilitation, then it stops and then that's it, I carry on with the rest of my life. I think from the guy that I mentor, he would say that it's just an ongoing process and you're always working at it. And he, over 20 years after his injury, is always still working. He does his physio, he's always trying to, improve and get better and develop himself. I touched on this earlier about rehab placements and community rehab support since COVID. Some people were, we're not in the sort of, major lockdown situation anymore where people were sort of just completely redeployed, but there was a focus on redeployment and prioritising hospital discharge. And like I said before, I went to a conference a couple of months ago where there was a presentation from a lady who is in Kent talking about the rehab services there, and she was just explaining how just in their region the services are so varied, and you could live 10 miles down the road from somebody else and be offered some, more or less, just depending on where you are. So what it's obviously, it would be fantastic for everybody to be offered the same and everybody to be offered that personalised rehabilitation that we that is the best for people who've had a stroke. But I think it's also very useful, especially if you struggle with communicating after a stroke, to have somebody, a family or a family member or a friend who can help you and advocate for you and support you, or people from charities or Citizens Advice Bureau, things like that, who can actually be a voice to help access some services that might not immediately be offered. And I've just put a note in here as well, whether it may help people to refer to that 2016 National Clinical Guideline, whether that might help to access some services that aren't sort of offered immediately. And then I just wanted to consider a little bit about what the future may be for stroke rehabilitation. So many of you may know that there was a big campaign for the acquired brain injury strategy, and that was approved. And so there's now they're now in a consultation period and there was a survey that some of you may have completed about what do people who have had a brain injury, which obviously includes stroke, what do they want from the ABI strategy. And the time for completing that has now closed, but there's going to be there will be a report on what the main things that were identified for improving services for people who have an acquired brain injury. So I wonder whether I did complete the questionnaire, and I didn't record all my answers, but I do remember explaining that I thought rehabilitation for people who've had an acquired brain injury is really important, and that should be a priority for the ABI strategy. So yeah, in the future, possibly the ABI strategy may improve and increase rehab provision. South East London have been working really hard to improve their community rehabilitation. So they started a project just a year or two before the pandemic hit, but they worked really hard through the pandemic to still progress their community rehab offering. And they, from what I have heard, they're doing really well, and they've added other posts that can offer more specialised rehabilitation. So again, this is sort of, area specific. It would be good to have a national guideline, national stroke, that national strategy that everybody follows. But it's good that there are services out there that are recognising, and other services may see that as an example and try and follow that. And I also think that in the future, there may be an increase in assistive technology, apps, virtual rehab environments. The pandemic sort of led us down that road a little bit already, but I think that some people have really seen the benefits of that. So I think that may continue and allow greater access to rehabilitation for people where the funds might not allow those services. So that was all I wanted to say about rehabilitation, but we'll have some time for questions at the end. I just wanted to do a very, very brief, a couple of minutes, just to explain what I talked about last year. So last year I did a full presentation on the sort of legal issues that people might face after they've had a stroke. I'm not going to go into any detail now, but there are a number of different legal issues that you may face after you've had a stroke, and you may need to consult with different sort of legal experts for each of these. But people might have public law issues. So are you receiving the care and the benefits and the rehab that you are entitled to? Lots of people, and I know we've already got a few questions about employment issues after having a stroke. So what are the rules on sick leave? What are the reasonable adjustments? Am I being discriminated against? Court of protection, if somebody lacks capacity to manage their own finances or look after their own welfare, a deputy may need to be appointed, and that's another, the Court of Protection is a separate area of law that you might need to be involved in. Also, we know that families come under a lot of strain after somebody's had a stroke or any type of brain injury, so there can be issues around separation and divorce, sadly, or to do with children and childcare. And then finally, the job that I do, which is injury litigation. So if somebody suffered a stroke and they think that it could have been avoided, or it's caused by something that shouldn't have happened, then that's where the team that I work for steps in and tries to help. And so for cases where somebody's had a stroke, it's usually a medical negligence case, and it can be any of these things and many other things. So monitoring and treating of blood pressure, failing to recognise symptoms of stroke, and people calling ambulances and going into A&E and being sent home, not diagnosing and treating in time, and sometimes strokes can be caused by an iatrogenic injury. So that's like while you're having some other medical treatment, you are caused a stroke. The funding of past and future losses caused by negligence, that's what we aim to achieve for people who instruct us in their cases. So just as an overall kind of overview of what I've talked about today, I really think that rehabilitation has to be a holistic approach, and I appreciate, like I've said probably about 10 times already, that services and funding doesn't always allow everybody to have everything that they would wish for, but I think that there are things out there that you can try and access that might make small differences, and I think those small gains can really make a difference. And I would just recommend that obtaining the best rehab package that is available to you is important, and the support of other people, so family members, friends, anybody who's out there and rooting for you, if you can get them on board and get them to help you if you're struggling to communicate with healthcare professionals or whoever, that can really help to make a difference. And if you do have legal issues, then you should seek support for those. And for employment, I know there are a few questions coming up, so there are various different places to go for employment or wherever. And I think that must be the last slide. Yeah, there's a few links here. There's the stroke guideline, some blogs that I've written about young stroke, last year's presentation, and my email address if anybody wants to get in touch afterwards. So maybe I will stop. Shall I leave that up, Austin? Or
yeah, if we just maybe we'll just leave that up for a couple.
I'll leave that up for a few minutes. Okay.
In case anyone would like to take those details down, and we have had a few requests as well from people, Laura, from people to see the slides, so maybe if you could.
Oh yeah, that's absolutely fine. I can send those
the slides
through
with me after the session, and then if anyone would like the slides, please do email us at info@differentstrokes.co.uk. I'll pop our email address in the chat in a moment, and we'll be able to forward the slides to you. Laura, thank you so much for that. That's absolutely fantastic talk. We've had a lot of questions come in. We've had a lot of comments in the chat as well, and it's been.
I'll do my best.
It's been clear from the comments in the chat that a lot of people feel that they really haven't had a great deal of rehabilitation, and more than one person has described it when that brief period of rehabilitation comes to an end post-stroke as kind of like falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
So what it is, so we've got a lot of questions come in. I think what I'd like to do is take some questions to do with specifically rehabilitation first, and then after that, time permitting, we might get on to some others that are about more general issues. But one of the questions that we came in advance which came in advance in very general terms is, how do I get extra physio? Yeah,
so I think it kind of comes back to the sort of stuff that I was saying about having people to help you and be a voice for you. But I think in terms of accessing extra physio, some specific ideas that I had was, I know that after you've had a stroke, you should be having a review, a neurology review regularly. So that could be something to raise at a neurology review appointment to see if there could be any kind of referral back for further physio. And another avenue, if you have sort of like a social worker again, so I've seen with clients of mine where social workers have tried to get the community rehab team re-involved with somebody who's had a stroke and are in the community. So that social workers are another possible avenue for raising the concern and trying to get some services and get some awareness of services. GPs as well. I know they can't always work miracles, but I think, you know, if you're struggling, it might be worth just asking and seeing if they can re-engage you with any of those community services that might be available in your area. Those are the sort of the publicly funded options. Private funding, obviously, you know, if you can get it, then great. But otherwise, I know. I would recommend, you know, sort of like the online sessions and things. If you've tried all of those things and you're not being able to access anything else, I know, I think, Austin, correct me if I'm wrong, that many of the sessions that you ran previously are still sort of available. So I know it's harder to, I know myself from trying to do, you know, like exercise and stuff at home, it's harder to motivate yourself when you're at home on your own, rather than actually, you know, with somebody in person. But I think those are a good thing to try and do if you can. If there's no other access. But I think definitely having somebody to help you and to kind of advocate for you, a good friend or a family member, and then, you know, trying those avenues, GP, neurologist, social worker, to see if anybody can get a referral back through the physio.
Thank you. Do you have more details about private rehab services, because this was one of the questions asked?
Yeah, well, I mean, if people want to instruct a physiotherapist or, you know, a speech and language therapist, there are a huge number of therapists out there who provide services on a private basis. So a lot of them, some work independently, but there are many that work for these sort of like big case management companies, and they will have, like, you know, they'll have their case managers, but they'll have a group of speech and language therapists who work for them as well, and a group of physios who work for them. So I could send through possibly afterwards a few like recommendations for where to look for private rehabilitation.
Yep, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. So I'm just having a sweep of our rehabilitation questions. There's been some fantastic comments on here. Someone did also comment on the benefits of doing yoga to help with rehabilitation, and it's a good opportunity now to plug our session with Anna, a stroke survivor herself, who'll be doing survivor yoga at 2 o'clock this afternoon. So if you're able, please do join us for that. Moving on now and looking at some of the questions, you know, regarding kind of more legal issues. And firstly, how long after the stroke can you help with medical negligence?
As with pretty much everything, it's not a straightforward answer. If the person has capacity, so if they have capacity to bring a case by themselves, then the time limit would be 3 years from the date that they're aware that there's a potential claim. If they don't have capacity, or if capacity, and when I talk about capacity, I'm talking about, do they have the cognitive ability to instruct a solicitor and to understand what's happening? That has to be assessed by a neuropsychiatrist or a neuropsychologist. If they don't have capacity, then there's an exception to the 3-year time limit. But generally, when we take on cases, we prefer them to be within that initial 3-year time period. And we'd usually, if we have a question mark over whether somebody has capacity, we get an assessment as soon as we possibly can. And we would always issue court proceedings within that 3-year time limit if we're not sure. So, long answer to a short question, but generally within 3 years of that knowledge.
Going back to rehabilitation, another one that we had come in. So for the guidelines that you mentioned to be followed nationally as they're evidence-based, there would need to be a mandate for commissioners to tender out and ensure that trusts provide services, but this can be a bit of a postcode lottery. And do you have any more thoughts on how this could be more evenly divided, or, you know, to help patients, you know, still be able to reach them?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough one, because I mentioned the South East London. They've obviously got people in South East London who are really committed and really passionate about rehabilitation and really really appreciate the benefits of rehabilitation. So it's a postcode lottery, but if you've got people in your area who are on the mission to try and get better rehab into your area, then I think you're in a better position. But I don't think there's, I think it's really difficult for individuals to change that. So I don't know if there are any, you know, one of the things that I am planning to do with these freedom of information requests and making sure that highlighting these issues around young stroke survivors and rehabilitation is to sort of campaign and try and raise awareness. But you know, for individuals, it's really hard to make those changes in your local area. I think it has to come really from above and from raising awareness. It feels like a little bit of a non-answer answer, because I don't know what the answer is to improving that consistency. It happens across lots of different areas of healthcare, and yeah, it's a shame. But I think I'm hoping that, you know, if this South East London project is seen as a good way to improve services, and others may follow. I don't know exactly how well publicised that is, but they've been trying really hard.
And a few people have mentioned physio to you, which actually both myself and Laura simultaneously have just popped in the chat there, if people would like to Google that to find more answer. Okay, so another couple of legal questions, and this was one that we had come in advance.
Mm-hmm.
My employer terminated my contract after work, convinced I didn't tell them, but I developed seizures after my stroke.
Yeah.
But I didn't know I had. So it sounds to me like this individual probably wasn't aware that they had seizures.
Yeah.
And had one in the workplace. Was I unfairly dismissed?
Yeah, I think it sounds a little bit unfair that you know, if that person didn't know they had seizures and that happened at work and then they were dismissed. I would, not being an employment law specialist, that you'd need to get specialist advice by contacting ACAS or an employment law specialist. But what I would say is that probably there would, in that situation, another occupational health assessment, you know, that may have been a better way to go rather than dismissal, and then looking at whether there are reasonable adjustments that can cater to any difficulties that seizures might create in the workplace. So I mean, it's difficult to give an answer to that person about whether they were unfairly dismissed, you know, just on that information. So I would recommend that, you know, if this is fairly recent and they're still wanting to take that up with their employer, that either get in touch with ACAS, or if you want to go straight to a solicitor, go to the Law Society website and look for an employment law specialist.
Okay, thank you. Another one I've had come in today, and this is quite a long question that I'm sure there won't be a nice simple answer to, but
yeah, no, they never seem to be straightforward.
I survived a stroke in 2015. I've been back at work full-time since 2016. I've had some work issues and submitted some grievances, and eventually had to appoint my own employment solicitor.
Yeah.
Submitted ET claims, securing a settlement agreement and small financial settlement earlier this year. I'm having some work HR issues again, and I feel my employer are now taking me down the capability route following receipt of an occupational health referral. I'm unsure whether to positively embrace this or have a protective conversation on this and what it might mean about me working in the future. Do you have any advice?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'm really sorry to this person that all this has happened to them. I think if you feel like it's going down that route again, it's probably best to take advice, specialist employment law advice, sooner rather than later, even if it doesn't end up coming to the whole process that you went through before. The main things, again, in terms of employment is whether your employer has made reasonable adjustments, and that is not, there's no hard and fast rules on what reasonable adjustments are, because it depends on the business that you work for, what their resources are, and it depends on the individual as well. So again, it's a very personalized assessment that looks at both employer and employee, and so again, I can't give a complete full answer to that question, but I think if there are concerns, again, if you're happy with your previous employment solicitor, just have a quick chat with them and see what they think about whether it needs to be looked at further.
No problem. Thank you, Laura. We're just coming up. I think we've just got a couple more questions. So actually, maybe could maybe remove the screen share.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Screen. I think everyone's probably had a chance to take down those details now. Thank you. We've got one here that's come in today. I suffered a spinal stroke after the AstraZeneca vaccine. If I receive a full vaccine damage payout, it will work out at about 3 years' wages. My question is there a way to go after the pharma companies or to take the government to court?
At the moment, we aren't taking on sort of cases relating to that, because there is the vaccine, obviously the vaccine damages payout, but things may move on. I don't know if, there are other firms that are starting. We were definitely having inquiries around these kind of things, and at the moment, our sort of risk assessment has been that we don't think there would be enough of a chance of succeeding in those cases. But I don't know. Obviously this is everything around all of this, and the repercussions of the pandemic, are all very new and evolving. So that may change in the future. I don't. That's that's as much as I can say really on that.
Thank you. What obligation do 0 hours contracts have under the Equality Act? So this was a question that came in advance, and I'm imagining it's being asked from a perspective of possibly someone who had a 0 hours contract and then maybe had a stroke, and we're asking kind of what their rights are in this area.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a really difficult position to be in. I had to look this up and try and work out what I think about this, again, outside my area of specialism. But I think, and I don't know, maybe the Disability and Equality Act makes a difference, but generally, if somebody's on a 0 hours contract, I don't think they have, the employer has an obligation to give them work in any event. So I don't know if that would be any different, which seems like a really unfair position to be in. I would defer to a specialist on that point. ACAS are really good for giving some initial advice, and again, you can go to the Law Society website, and a lot of employment law specialists will just have a phone call with you for half an hour or so, just to give you some general advice on that. I may be completely wrong, but my sort of research on that suggests that that's probably the case. But yeah, I would try and find some specialist advice on that one.
No worries. Thank you, Laura. Laura, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, once again, it's really good for you running through that presentation with us, and for taking all the questions in quite a range of areas. It's as I said, it's clear from the questions and the chat that this is such a fundamental issue for so many stroke survivors.
Yeah, and if you get more questions afterwards, I'm happy to try and help, provide some answers.
Yeah.
If there's anybody didn't get a chance to ask what they wanted to today.
That would be fantastic. Thank you. And hopefully everyone who's viewing had a chance to take Laura's direct contact details if there is anything that you want to ask her. But again, please feel free to contact us at info@differentstrokes.co.uk if you've got any queries, if you've got any questions, if there's anything that we didn't get a chance to touch on and cover today. Laura, once again, thank you so much. Really,
no, thank you.
You giving up your time to speak to us.
Oh, you're really welcome.
I know that everyone viewing this webinar does as well. For anyone who joined us late, if you'd like to see the whole session, this session is being recorded, and this session, alongside all our other sessions this week, will be available on our website within a week or so after the conference. Coming up later today, we have Survivor Yoga with Anna Kerry, who will be running that session at 2 o'clock this afternoon. And then tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, we have a panel discussion with stroke survivors talking about fatigue and the ways that they cope with that, hosted by my colleague Janice. But once again, thank you to Laura, and thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. And I hope to see you here very soon. Bye-bye.